Welcome to the STEM Confidence Podcast, where we talk about how to turn your data into powerful insights. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the STEM Confidence Podcast. In this episode, we are going to talk about one topic that I have always been very interested in, and I can say that I feel completely fascinated by it. And that is simplification. Of course, simplification might be applied in many aspects of life, but here we are going to talk about simplifying complex ideas and concepts and making them easy and understandable. As STEM professionals, we are often exposed to highly technical jargon, and it is our job to bridge the gap and translate our knowledge into plain language. As I said many times, I am a firm believer that your expertise as a professional comes from how able you are to simplify your ideas, your thoughts, and your work, and make them as accessible as possible to a wider audience. And by that, I don't necessarily mean a talk or a presentation. I think this is also true if you are having a conversation with your colleague or trying to explain your research to your grandma. Sometimes, when people working in other fields ask me to break down my research, I'm always fascinated by the task of making it relatable to them. So I try to find a way to connect it to their own knowledge and interests to make sure that we are on the same page. Another concept that, in my opinion, goes hand in hand with simplification is clarity. And this is because as soon as we are forced to make our explanations simpler, we automatically make it clearer as well. And this is a really exciting process because, in a way, in order to reach clarity, we are forced to simplify our thoughts and ideas. So, without further ado, let's move to the 3 tips of how to explain yourself better by making your ideas simpler and easier to understand. So, one of the first reasons people have problems communicating is because they are very stuck in their own heads and they forget who they are talking to. So, the first requirement to effectively communicate a complex point is to understand the perspective of your audience. It is that simple. Putting yourself into the audience's perspective is always the first step. And I know when I explain it in the way I just did, it doesn't seem to be very difficult to apply, but I believe that it is an issue that is often overlooked. And to prove my point, I would like to propose an exercise. So try to think, when was the last time that you were in a meeting or listening to a talk and you really understood what the person was talking about? Is it one or maybe two in the last few weeks? If I have to think about it, my number would also be around that, and certainly less than 5. So even though this advice might seem simple, sometimes we are so stuck in our work that we don't even realize we are using jargonized phrases. Another good point when explaining complex ideas as a STEM professional is to simplify far beyond when you think you've simplified enough. And this actually brings me to the next point, which is to script your talk and make it conversational. So, when explaining complex ideas, it is crucial to maintain a conversational tone and avoid academic explanations, even when your audience is academic. When preparing a talk, a good idea is to script it, especially if you are in the beginning of your career. You should plan what you want to say and then say it in the simplest possible way. So, how is this done? Certainly, you cannot include all of your work and your entire project in a brief 15-minute talk, so you first have to choose what stays and what goes. Try to identify what is the core of your problem. Try to explain it in a simple and understandable way, and then build your talk around it. More often than not, explaining what is it that you did or what is it that you're doing right now is much more relatable than explaining how you're doing it. So my suggestion is to always start with what and then expand onto the how. Another point is to plan carefully and memorize your phrases. It is very common that when we are insecure about what we are going to say, we start giving very complex and not straightforward explanations. So, to avoid this, just have a few core sentences that summarize your work in a simple way that you can always rely on. And when editing your talk, try to remove any excess and any friction that might be created by using too many words. Your goal in this situation is to highlight the main keywords and stick to the same messages during the entire explanation or talk. And the final advice that I have is to practice with different audiences. This one might sound very complicated because one would instantly assume that you have to have an audience of people ready to give you feedback. But this is actually not the case at all, because in fact, anyone could be your audience. They don't even need to be physically there. Imagine you are talking to a friend or a family member who knows nothing about your work. Actually, the best audience are the people who don't have a clue about what you are talking about. Your friends and family, for example, that don't understand at all what your work consists of and are really ready to tell you, I don't get it. The best type of feedback someone could give you is to say they don't get it. And this is actually great news because it makes you think about what can you do to make it simpler and understandable. And it kind of removes you from your jargonized STEM bubble. So to sum up, in order to make your work more relatable and more understandable, you have to simplify it. To do so, you first need to understand who you are talking to and what is the background of the people who are listening to you. Remember, whatever the background, always try to simplify far beyond when you think you've simplified enough. It is also a good idea to prepare your talk and make it sound like a conversation. And believe me, this will not make you look less of a professional. On the contrary, it will make you more relatable and more accessible. And finally, practice with different audiences. They can be either physical audiences or invented audiences. Practicing with different audiences is crucial to understand how far you can stretch a given concept, since you are definitely going to tailor your simplification to your target audience. Thank you for listening, and until next time. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you are ready to elevate your communication skills and transform your data into valuable insights, schedule a free discovery call on the link in the description.